Hello and welcome to In Pursuit of Clarity, episode 15, entitled Socrates, Gorgias, and Rootless Persuasion. As per usual, I wanted to pull back our perspective and discuss what I feel to be a dangerous trend, and one becoming more prevalent over time. One might even say this trend began with that enigma of a man, Socrates, and his sophists and dialecticians. This brilliant but ugly man taught his pupils to win arguments, but not necessarily in that noble way in which both parties earnestly quest for truth wherever it may lie, but in a more shrewd, and one could even say devious and underhanded manner. I'm not saying this was his intent, but at the very least it seemed to be the end result effect, kick-starting a millennia of disputatious pill-pull type argumentation, an environment in which I believe waters actually become more muddied, not less, and truths are less cleanly understood after the process of argumentation than they were before it began. This wasn't entirely the fault of Socrates, of course, and even in his day, he merely opened the door, a door through which a much more extreme and poisonous form of his ideas stepped through, in the personage of a man named Gorgias. At their best, Socrates' methods acted as something of a process of a trial by fire of concepts and ideas. But Gorgias, and all of his own students to come after him, seemed to directly teach the art of corrupting and confusing, of knot-tying and chaotic tangling. For lack of a better term, we'll call this the substitution method, and it works a bit like this. If A equals B and B equals C, then C must essentially equal A. And if C is bad, then A must be bad. This definition is a vast oversimplification on my part, but purposefully so, to avoid framing it too narrowly, since this is such a broadly applicable tactic, being used on all fronts in the modern world in different forms, and I'd like us to consider it broadly. Think of how the Saul Alinsky left wing plays politics by association. If you can connect your foe to something nefarious, and then connect this nefarious thing to something still more terrible, you can then frame things as if your foe directly represents this most terrible thing. And because our brains naturally seek pattern and connection in everything, this substitution works more often than not. The major issue here, as I'm sure we all recognize but rarely voice or give much concerted thought to, is that there aren't any two words or concepts in any language that mean the exact same thing to everyone. So A never truly equals B, and B never truly equals C, and least of all then does C actually equal A. These are imperfect compromises, often lazy and slapdash, and at each step we move further from the essence of things, and give the sophist or lawyer more wiggle room to make whatever case he pleases, and often in a convincing manner, even if and when it's not technically true. This substitution mechanism is as clever as it is intellectually dishonest. Could Socrates and a few men of his day have used it more often than not in the most righteous and noble-minded way in order to draw apt analogies to better understand a subject? Certainly, and it's very possible he didn't see the writing on the wall with regards to the Pandora's box he was opening. As these means and methods, and this powerful tool enter the hands of lesser men with baser intentions. But a Pandora's box it certainly was, and one with profound implications. Nearly every judgment and attack on the right wing or the nationalist element in the West proceeds along this path of intellectually lazy substitutions. And in fact, this tactic is now even being used to justify violence. If you wear that red hat, you support a man that calls Mexicans murderers and rapists. Well, I read that Nazis demonized minorities and killed people. Therefore, you must be stopped immediately, or you may well kill people. Never mind if the wearer of the hat is an elderly woman who only wants to see an end to rampant political and economic corruption, or that Trump never actually called all Mexicans anything of the sort, or that the comparison of Mexican migrants in America to Jews in Germany couldn't be more off base. As long as each clumsy substitution step is just reasonable enough to be believed by some gullible party, it gains traction, and it works. There will be a crowd willing to punch those who wear these hats, due to this absurd string of faulty assumptions. What's even more disturbing is it seems that once this association is made, it quickly solidifies, and the naive mind that embraced it often jettisons completely the middle step in this A, B, C comparison, and proceeds to consider A to be directly equal to C, and feels completely justified in doing so. This is how the dishonest and manipulative gain power and accomplish their aims and bludgeon their foes, a process of lurking in the shadows and indirect linkage and mischaracterization. If truth were their focus, they'd look at the wearer of this hat in isolation, looking at their words and actions and stated opinions, or at least those of others who wear the hat, and from there ascertain whether this old lady is, in fact, a genocidal threat. But of course this route would fall flat and would strip the disingenuous weapon from their hands before they even had the chance to swing it. They require these multiple substitution jumps to create this power and this effective bludgeon, which essentially can't be dodged or parried. Men such as Socrates and Gorgias may have created this munitions factory, capable of producing an endless supply of weaponry, without negative intent. But the tribe and culture currently making full use of the tactics, namely the inheritors of the Frankfurt School tradition and the Saul Alinsky types on the public stage, knew full well what they were doing, and did it anyway. They were developing a means of efficient deception to serve their own ends, a means of muddying waters so that they might benefit from the resulting chaos. What's more, the adherents of this school of thought and their ilk have essentially won the day. An entire subset of people learning tricks and tactics solely geared towards attaining power for power's sake, and leaving a trail of destruction and confusion and misapprehension in their wake, and not caring a bit about having done so. Think about the ramifications of a man like Gorgias teaching many of the best and brightest minds in the most influential section of the world persuasion as a standalone skill set. Not persuading them towards truth or courage on the battlefield, or heroism, or self-sacrifice, not paired with any noble aim, but solely the art of persuasion for its own sake. I tend to think this mindset is at the core of what's gone so deeply wrong with the modern world. What I respect so deeply about the heart of the Indo-European tradition in this regard is that it seems to represent, when broadly viewed, the antithesis of this, and a genuine striving for clarity in thought and speech, even in cases in which this clarity doesn't yield immediate personal benefit. As I mentioned in my previous history video, the Scythians were universally regarded as being noble and just and fair-minded, and as I'll cover in the next video, the Spartans especially were known for being men of few words, not seeking to tie their opponent into knots or engage in rhetorical trickery, but the exact opposite. They aimed to speak little and say much. Socrates even called them the wisest of men, remarking on the characteristically blunt Laconian speech, saying, quote, "They conceal their wisdom and pretend to be blockheads, so that they may seem to be superior only because of their prowess in battle. This is how you may know that I am speaking the truth, and that the Spartans are the best educated in philosophy and speaking. If you talk to any ordinary Spartan, he seems to be stupid, but eventually, like an expert marksman, he shoots in some brief remark that proves you to be only a child." End quote. This substitution method of framing the world is a means of divesting power from what I would deem to be a higher caliber of individual, and organically puts the power in the hands of the most audacious, those most willing to wield this weapon with impunity. These substitutions don't merely occur in rhetorical contests, but more and more in the world of ideas and concepts as well. A good example of this is our conceptually substituting or equating our brand of capitalism with a meritocratic construct. Because it does take some ability, work ethic, and ambition to succeed in a capitalistic environment, the effort to paint it as the healthiest of systems in which the best and brightest succeed and others fall flat due to their own failings, has been largely successful, an illusion only recently beginning to fall to pieces in the minds of many. In summary, whether we call it a substitution mechanism, an association mechanism, or any other name under the sun, the crux of the methodology is to deceptively misuse the concepts of correlation or analogy or example to pretend one thing is like another as a means of muddying the waters and perverting the clarity of thought and discourse. It's a profoundly powerful weapon Socrates helped craft, and weapons are made to destroy. In the best cases, they help to destroy impediments to our development. In the worst, they can destroy the very foundations of our development. I tend to think the Western tradition of laconic communication sprang from high-trust cultures that saw the potential for convoluted word stews to have great manipulative and deceptive power, and their potential to cause us to stray further from the mark, to use an archery term. And I think it's further significant that Aryan peoples initially defined sin as something akin to missing the mark, like an arrow straying from its target. To allow for arrows that once again pierce their intended targets, it's vital to understand those means and methods being used, whether conscious or otherwise, to lead us astray. Combine a high-trust culture with clarity of thought and speech, and anything is possible. Thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my own.